This video is brought to you by Warhammer 40k Tacticus. In the grim darkness of the far future, humanity is beset on all sides by some of the most truly horrific and monstrous entities imaginable. Dark eldritch gods that view the living as nothing more than playthings. All manner of heretics, witches, mutants, and alien abominations that lurk deep in the void of space and hunger for the flesh of mortal men. To be born into such a galaxy is a truly horrific fate indeed. But aside from the various heroic forces that seek to protect the kingdom of man, there is a force far more powerful that inspires hope in the believer and fear in the hearts of the corrupt. I speak, of course, of faith, of the collective belief of an entire species that propels them to ever-increasing acts of greatness, even in such a miserable existence. Now, although the faithful are many, with an estimated human population in the quintillions, none are more adept at using the powers of faith as a weapon than that of the Adepta Sororitas. The Sisters of Battle, as they are often called, are a truly ancient and righteous organization of battle-hardened women, each possessing considerable martial skill and raised from birth in some of the most stringent and brutal military academies in the galaxy. Each and every warrior possessing a deadly combination of intellect, military prowess, and unbreakable resolve in their holy crusade. The Sisters march to war armored by steel and faith, and deliver salvation to those that follow in the Emperor's light, and his divine judgment to the wicked. They are armed with the Holy Trinity, Bolter, Flamer, and Melta, with which they deliver the Emperor's divine obliteration to the heretic, the witch, and the mutant. While they fight, they sing hymns and shout out the names of their blessed saints and founders. The screams of the unclean, drowned out by the roar of chainswords and the prayers bellowed in his name. Sisters in winged jump packs fly overhead, descending upon their enemies like a retinue of vengeful angels, while multi-missiles from their artillery tanks rain down upon the fortification of the heretics as if from heaven itself. Each and every weapon, piece of armor, and war machine is anointed with holy scripture, sanctified by the priests of their order. Their faith in the Emperor is so absolute that the Sisters display a level of fearlessness unheard of for mortals. And perhaps even more remarkably, their faith often manifests itself through literal miracles. The force of a blow being amplified beyond what is possible, the stock of their gun breaking through armored helmets and crushing skulls, charging heretics suddenly bursting into flames, attacks from their enemies that by all accounts should have been mortal injuries, leaving little more than faint bruises, or even literal angels materializing out of nowhere the moment all hope seems lost. They march across the galaxy, showing no mercy to the demonic abominations that have wormed their way into the hearts of the weak, for all that stray from his light must face his divine judgment. To stand against the Sisters of Battle is to fight belief itself, a force that is unkillable, unwavering, unquestioning, and unrelenting. Their holy wars will never end until every last ounce of corruption has been ripped from the beating heart of the Imperium, and the stars themselves are stained red with the blood of heretics. Through the fires of war and their righteous zeal, will the Sisters cleanse the galaxy of the heretic, the witch, and the alien, purged in his name. So with all that out of the way, what exactly are the Sisters of Battle, and what are they all about? Well, the Sisters of Battle are a militant branch of a larger organization known as the Adepta Sororitas, which itself is an all-female sisterhood of an even larger organization known as the Adeptus Ministorum, or more commonly as the Ecclesiarchy. Now, you can think of the Ecclesiarchy like the official state church of the Imperium. That maintains that the Emperor of Mankind was a living god who walked amongst his servants before ascending to the realm of the spiritual with his entombment upon the golden throne. He now watches over and protects mankind from the heavens. Their religion is officially known as the Imperial Cult, and the tenets they lay out as the Imperial Creed. It is the faith shared by just about every loyal human alive, with the exception of a handful of factions such as the Adeptus Mechanicus or the majority of the Space Marines, to name but a few. The Church itself controls an enormous amount of power and holds great influence over the Imperium, standing side by side with the Adeptus Administratum as one of the primary powers governing day-to-day life within the Imperium. To the average citizen living amongst the million worlds of the Imperium, the Emperor has always been the god of humanity. It has always been this way. But we as the audience get to see him through the Horus Heresy novels and get a better understanding of his views on religious worship, something that he was definitely not in favor of at the time, and saw religion as a hindrance to mankind's ability to prosper. But from humanity's perspective, those events happened over 10,000 years ago, and the vast majority of the documentation of what he was actually like has either been lost or purged. They mostly just have to go on what the Ecclesiarchy has told them. Most of the knowledge of his divinity comes from a book known as the Lectitio Divinitatis, a tome that was penned by one of the Emperor's Primarch sons, Lorgar of the Wordbearers, who would go on to be the first betrayer of the Imperium and initiate the Horus Heresy, one of the bloodiest civil wars mankind had ever seen. And nowadays, he's literally a demon out in the warp doing all kinds of unspeakable evil things. To use a real-world example, it would be like the Bible being written by the devil. The fact that he wrote this book is known only to a few, such as Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines and the de facto leader of the Imperium in the 41st millennium. But if he were to reveal such knowledge, it would immediately be condemned as blasphemy by the Church, and would send the entirety of the Imperium into chaos, so he keeps his mouth shut. The Emperor is everywhere and everything at all times. It is believed that he offers his divine protection that those that believe in him. And the people of this time take great comfort in this, because the 40k universe, for lack of better words, is pretty brutal and horrifying. For those who live in squalor in the Underhives, or in poverty on some backwater agri-world that the Imperium has all but forgotten about, knowing that the Emperor is watching over them gives many the strength they need to keep going. When it comes to the way the Sisters of Battle view their faith, there are a few very specific beliefs that, although are not wholly unique to the Sisters, make them stand apart from the masses. That is the belief in righteous suffering and martyrdom. For the Sisters, suffering is to be embraced. For to suffer is to be made stronger and eventually be made immune to it. They believe there is no greater death than to die in the Emperor's name. Each sister believes that through death will her martyrdom light a fire in the hearts of thousands, if not millions. And over time, the tales of her heroic deeds will spread across the galaxy, inspiring courage and heroism in a whole new generation. It is a glorious death, and not to be feared, but embraced as going home to the Emperor. Before we go any further, a quick shout out to this video's sponsor, who was nice enough to provide some prizes to give away to my viewers. When I heard that Warhammer 40k Tacticus was gonna be a mobile game, I'm gonna be honest, I was a little bit skeptical. 40k games are hit or miss as it is, and that goes double for mobile games. But here's the thing, I actually ended up really enjoying it. The game is free to play and features dozens of iconic units and characters from the 40k franchise, and allows you to get in some awesome 40k gameplay whenever you want. Tacticus currently features 3 separate campaigns that see you spearhead the assault in some of 40k's most famous crusades, such as the Indomitus Crusade, the Fall of Cadia, and Warzone Octarius. The game also features a PvP arena mode, where you can test your skills against teams from around the world, a Tyranid-themed horde mode called Onslaught, and even some guild raids that see you and your guild working together to take down some truly monstrous creatures. Tacticus currently features 8 beloved factions from the Warhammer 40k universe, including the Ultramarines, the Adepta Sororitas, the Black Legion, Astra Militarum, Necrons, Black Templar, Death Guard, and everyone's favorite, the Orcs. And the developers have promised that they're going to be adding even more factions over time. Now, I've been playing Warhammer 40k for 15 years. I own a frankly irresponsible amount of Warhammer armies, and one of the world's largest piles of shame. And if it was up to me, I would be playing the tabletop game every day. But since YouTube became my full-time job, I just don't have a lot of time for gaming anymore. Tacticus has been absolutely amazing, and has allowed me to get my 40k fix without having to dedicate 5 hours to a single game. I launched the app and within seconds, I'm playing a condensed version of Warhammer 40k. And now is the perfect time to start playing the game, as it just launched a few days ago as of the time of this recording. So everyone is just getting started together. And the awesome people over at Tacticus were nice enough to supply me with some pretty cool prizes for my viewers, including a Tacticus hoodie, a combat patrol box, a painted miniature, and a set of painting supplies to get you started in the Warhammer hobby. So stay tuned to the end of the video for instructions on how to enter. It's totally free and you don't even have to download the game. So thanks again to the awesome people over at Warhammer 40k Tacticus for sponsoring this video. And with that out of the way, let's get into the grimdark. In the novel Mark of Faith by Rachel Harris, a group of sisters is fighting against the demonic forces of chaos. They have suffered enormous losses and are basically making their last stand. Now, one of these women who will become the main character of this story, Evangeline, is remarked by her fellow sisters as having one of the most beautiful voices in the entirety of the sororitas. This is a truly dark day, and the sisters know that it may be the end for them. So her fellow sister Isadora asks her, "Will you sing for us once more? Will you sing for us at the end?" She knows that her sisters take great comfort in her singing, and so she promises that she will. And this is when the sister superior of the group gives this speech. "We have suffered greatly here, my sisters, as we suffered at Ocassus and at Armageddon and on 100 other battlefields. But suffering is not to be lamented. Suffering is to be celebrated. Where there is suffering, there is life. There is spirit and fire and all of the things for which He made us. Where there is suffering, that is where we must fight, with every ounce of our strength he gave us, until it is time to join him in eternal glory. Fight, suffer, stand until you cannot, in his name. After this, the demons of Tzeentch begin to materialize all around them, and the sisters charge into battle, bolter shells blasting apart demons and chainswords roaring to life. Just as the sisters seem like they may end up having the upper hand, a greater demon, a Lord of Change, materializes before them, and through its twisting flamethrower made of pure warp magic, it begins to immolate the sisters one by one. The demons surge with newfound power at the appearance of their dark leader, and the sisters end up getting overwhelmed. Evangeline is fighting her hardest, her bolter pounding in her hands, but when she looks to her left, she sees her beloved sister Isadora engulfed in flames. And in a seemingly mocking cruelty, the Lord of Change casts a terrible spell that slows down time, forcing the soldiers to endure the agonizing pain. Evangeline wants to scream a roar of rage at the sight, but it's locked in her throat by the spell. Slowly, the burning face of her sister turns to her. Isadora manages one final request. "Sing," she says. The spell dissipates, and the woman falls to her knee, burning alive. Evangeline is the youngest of the group, and in comparison is inexperienced. She doesn't know what to do. She is completely overwhelmed. So she does the only thing she can, and she sings, just like she promised she would. "O God Emperor, who is strength, I devote this life to you." While she sings, her bolter barks its fury. She turns its wrath upon the greater demon, bursting feathers and blood into the air. The beast roars and wheels about, sending bouts of fire into her other sisters. "O God Emperor, who is grace, I devote this life to you." She buckles and falters, blood welling up in her throat, but never stops singing. She steadies herself and continues her march on this abhorrent abomination, the thing that has taken everything from her home and her sisters, but it hasn't taken her faith. As she sings, her sister Ashava manages to slip through the greater demon's guard, leaping into the air to meet it, her chainsword tearing into its flank. The beast screams in pain and grabs her out of the air with a clawed hand and smashes her into the ground. Evangeline's heart breaks as her sister's bones do. "O God Emperor, who is valor, I devote this life to you." She keeps singing, tears rolling down her face as the demon turns its bellowing fire onto their standard bearer, a relic that before the demons couldn't touch or even come near. The standard bearer warps and twists into a chaos spawn and throws itself at Evangeline, knocking her to the ground. Just before the creature can finish her off, its multifaceted head bursts apart. Standing behind it is her sister superior Adeline, holding a smoking bolter. "Sing, Evangeline," she says, as a tear trails through the blood and dirt on the old woman's face. Before Evangeline can get up, the greater demon lunges and swings its massive sword at them. There is a blinding light, and when it dissipates, the women are still alive. Her sister superior deflected the blow with her power sword, a seeming impossibility, a miracle. "Stand until you cannot," the old woman says to her. She gets up and stands by her sister superior, ready to face the demon once more. Its sword falls again. This time, a miracle does not manifest, and her sister superior is cut down, the blow cleaving straight through the power sword to eviscerate her. Evangeline screams in rage and deep sadness, and picks up the broken sword and stands against the chaotic monstrosity. She is the last sister standing, and the demons are swarming in on her. She is ready to join her fallen sisters. Despite her suffering, she finishes her song, "O God Emperor, I devote this death to you." She raises her hands in the shape of the Aquila, and the darkness takes her. And you'll just have to read the book for yourself if you want to know more. It's excellent, and this story comes from the first few pages, so I don't want to spoil the rest of it. The sacred orders of the Adepta Sororitas are thousands of years old, and began during one of the darkest periods in mankind's history, known as the Age of Apostasy. Thousands of years later, in the current time period of the 41st millennium, the sisterhood acts as one of mankind's greatest military forces, standing alongside that of the Space Marines, the Astra Militarum, the Imperial Navy, the Custodians, and the Adeptus Mechanicus. The presence of the sisters on the battlefield inspires the forces of the Astra Militarum in particular, due to their shared faith, to ever greater acts of bravery and heroism, such as the commanding charismatic presence that they hold. The Ecclesiarchy and the Sororitas are withholden to the larger imperium, but they can enact their own campaigns, known as Wars of Faith, if it is deemed that the imperial creed has been threatened. Such engagements can last for hundreds if not thousands of years, and are not complete until all traces of heresy have been completely eradicated. Such wars see the sisters ferried into battle in their thousands, their warriors sent to destroy and slaughter any who have strayed so far from the path of the righteous that even the Emperor's light cannot redeem them. They act in his name as judge, jury, and executioner of the condemned. Now, the Adepta Sororitas is a massive organization, and normally what we see in the lore is just their militant branches, which are often commonly referred to as the Sisters of Battle. The Sororitas actually features a lot of different orders that are not combat related, such as the Order Hospitaller, which focuses mainly on medical research and the training of battlefield medics. So if the Adepta Sororitas is such a massive organization, then how is it organized? Well, it is split between two major covenants, one on Terra, known as Covenant Prioris, and another on the sacred world of Ophelia 7, known as Covenant Sanctorum. The two covenants are then further broken down into many different smaller orders as well, such as the militant orders of the Bloody Rose, Martyred Lady, and Valorous Heart being based in Ophelia, while the Sacred Rose, Ebon Chalice, and Argent Shroud operate out of Terra, each one being founded by or at least dedicated to a specific saint. All of these different organizations have completely unique histories, cultures, and interpretation of religious doctrines. And whatever differences they may have, they can all agree that they serve the Emperor above all others and are instruments of his will. And when it comes to the Sisters' power hierarchy, it's pretty straightforward. At the absolute top, you have the rank of Abbess Sanctorum, a rank currently held by Morven Val. They are the leader of the entire Adepta Sororitas, and the position is that of the highest duties and responsibilities, one to be born with stoicism, rigid devotion, and humble acceptance. Beneath her are what is known as Priorises, who are the figureheads of each of the two covenants. And further down the line, every single order is represented by a Canoness Superior. Missions are often led by a Canoness, and well beneath her are her Palatines, or junior officers. And with all that out of the way, let's talk a bit more about how the Sisters wage war, by taking a closer look at a handful of their most iconic units. So the Battle Sisters serve as the frontline soldiers and bulk of the Adepta Sororitas' fighting force. These women are clad in power armor and trained extensively in the use of what is referred to as the Holy Trinity of Bolter, Melta, and Flamer. And I know I've said this about other things in the past, but that has got to be the most metal thing I have ever read. The Bolter represents the hand of the Emperor, reaching out to condemn the heretic. The Flamer and its bouts of holy fire, representing the Emperor's purifying word. Well, the Melta gun, which fires beams of superheated energy that can penetrate even the strongest metals in the galaxy, is seen as his penetrating gaze. And when the Holy Trinity is combined and utilized on the battlefield, it creates an all-purpose zone of death that obliterates hordes of infantry and armored vehicles alike, none escaping from the Sisters' judgment. Now, these women are not gene-augmented like their Space Marine cousins, instead are just human women, recruited from the Schola Progenium, which honestly deserves its own video, but to simplify it, you can think of it as the most elite military academy in the Imperium. Every sister is not only an incredibly skilled and disciplined warrior, but also has an incredible intellect, as the Progenium is absolutely ruthless and designed to weed out the weak. These women are often led by what is known as a Sister Superior, a veteran sister holding a rank similar to that of a sergeant in other factions, or more rarely by a Canoness, a shining beacon of righteousness and purpose, who can lead anything from a small mission of sisters, all the way up to an entire order in the case of a Canoness Superior. Dominion squads are sisters of battle that are normally armed with a variety of different flamer or melta weapons in order to clear out command bunkers and any strategic site of value to the sisterhood. They are women who are sent in to smash apart enemy defenses and break battle lines, and are noted for being incredibly courageous and aggressive. And whereas the Dominion squads are characterized by a hot-headedness, the Retributors, on the other hand, are calm and level-headed, said to have an almost serene-like demeanor about them. They've been intensely trained in the use of heavy weapons, and are said to be some of the best shots within the entirety of the sisterhood, displaying levels of almost inhuman accuracy. And although most commonly associated with the heavy bolter, it's not uncommon for Retributors to wield meltas or flamers as well, as they are all an essential part of the Trinity. The Retributors' main job is to provide supporting fire to their sisters as they advance in front of them, sending hammering volleys of bolter shells to punish those that would seek to do their sisters harm. The Celestians, on the other hand, are some of the most elite combat veterans within the ranks of the Sisters of Battle, women who have seen countless horrific wars, and often, though not exclusively, will be made into units of bodyguards and have been tasked with the sacred honor of escorting their Canoness into battle. Without a moment's hesitation, each one of these women would lay down their life for their beloved matriarch. The vast majority of Celestians served as Retributors or Dominions in the past, giving them access to a wide array of heavy firepower, and most of them managed to achieve the rank of a Sister Superior. And because of this, Each woman brings her own distinctive set of skills and experience to the group. The bond she shares with her sisters is deeper than any other, and together, this group of veterans is able to combine their shared wisdom to overcome any obstacle or foe, no matter how powerful or horrifying. But more so than just their extensive experience, they are heralded as being some of the most devout followers of their faith, ironclad pillars of wisdom and enlightenment that inspires their younger sisters, who hope to one day emulate at least a fraction of their greatness. Now we're going to move on to something a little bit darker, and that is of course the iconic Repentia. Units of Repentia are comprised of sisters who have at some point failed to live up to the incredibly stringent code of their order, whether it be a great personal failure, a lapse in faith, or any such other misdoing that her sister superiors believe demands penance. Such a sister will be stripped of her power armor and her guns, and will instead be given a massive two-handed chainsword known simply as an eviscerator. She will then be forced to take to the battlefield in nothing more than simple clothes and humble rags. The sisters that would be known as Repentia seek penance for their failure through glorious and holy butchery, or at the very least, absolution through their death, as there is no greater honor than to die fighting in the Emperor's name. And the way their fellow sisters view them is actually pretty interesting, because on one hand, they are outcasts and represent abject failure. But on the other, the fellow battle sisters have an enormous amount of respect for them. They are viewed as pilgrims ready to make the ultimate sacrifice for their faith, absolutely fearless in the face of overwhelming odds. Becoming a Repentia is possible for any member of the sisterhood, no matter what their rank is, from new recruits all the way up to a canoness. Even Saint Celestine was said to have served as a Repentia at one point. And even the sisters of the non-militant orders can end up as Repentia. And it doesn't have to be ordained by her superiors. There are many documented cases of sisters volunteering to take on the role of Repentia in a personal quest to atone for a perceived mistake. It doesn't matter if her sisters blame her or not. In her eyes, she has failed those closest to her and must do this to make amends. They take to the battlefield charging directly into the enemy's front lines, their eviscerators roaring, hungry for the blood of heretics. They strike and slash at their enemies, every blow sending limbs spiraling through the air and unleashing torrents of blood and gore. Enemy after enemy is cut down, and with every corpse she creates, she feels the forgiveness of the God Emperor coming closer and closer. The worst sin that a Repentia can make is fleeing from battle. It is the ultimate act of cowardice and betrayal. It is to spit directly in the face of the God Emperor and to reject his offer of forgiveness. Such a crime is met with a truly horrific punishment. The deserter is placed into a cruel machine known as a mortifier engine. Now, much like the Penitent Engine, which we'll cover momentarily, it is a bipedal war machine wielding devastating melee weapons. The sister is blindfolded and sealed inside the armored soundproof sarcophagus. She is then bound to the point where she can't even move. She will then be hooked up to the coffin's neural agonizer array, a pretty barbaric device specifically designed to enhance the pilot's self-loathing exponentially. While the engine fights, driven on by her mental anguish, she will be fully aware that the machine is in battle, on a righteous crusade to slaughter the enemies of the Emperor, a battle that she will not be permitted to take part in. And to be denied the slaughtering of his enemies is downright torturous. She knows there is no hope and that her death is soon to follow, an unremembered end of no significance, the truly worst fate that could befall a sister. The Penitent Engine, on the other hand, fulfills a similar role but ditches the armored sarcophagus. It is piloted by sinners, criminals, and heretics, but very specifically, a sinner who has repented their blasphemy against the Emperor, someone who truly wishes to be redeemed. The major difference here is that being placed in a mortifier is a fate that befalls the Repentia specifically, a position that was already a second chance at atonement. There is no third chances within the Adepta Sororitas. The pilots are normally members of the Ecclesiarchy, whether they be part of the Sororitas itself or the larger Ministorum, individuals who have strayed from the path of the Emperor's light, and through their mistakes or lapse in faith, have brought about the deaths of members of the faithful. And rather than simply being condemned and executed, they are given the opportunity to have their death mean something, and more importantly, to gain the God Emperor's forgiveness. In order to seek such an atonement, the individual is strapped to the front of the war machine and fitted with a whole array of cybernetic implants that link them with the machine, while simultaneously having an enormous amount of life-preserving chemicals pumped into their body. The sinner is often clothed only in simple rags, the Emperor's divine protection being the only armor that they will receive. The engine and its pilot are driven by a frenzied need to be forgiven, hurling themselves into combat and rampantly slaughtering the enemy until they are inevitably put down. The drugs that are constantly being pumped into their bloodstream are miraculous at preserving life. They, however, are not given any form of painkiller, as salvation is achieved through great suffering, meaning that the sinner can suffer grievous injuries that would surely kill them over and over and over, yet they will not be granted the mercy of death. The Sisters of Battle see it as their sacred duty to bear witness to the holy carnage brought about by the Penitent Engines. It is a grotesque, brutal, and sickening display, and even though the pilots have committed heinous crimes, their willingness to do this, to throw themselves into the fray, is a remarkable act of devotion that should be respected. And finally, I want to talk about one of the strangest entities that the Sisters utilize in war. They're known as the Living Saints, Saint Celestine potentially being the most famous of which. These are divine, angel-like entities that seem to appear almost at random, whenever they are needed the most, and most of their reported sightings end with their apparent death, only for them to reappear once more, sometimes decades or even centuries later. The Living Saints were mortals at one point, that through their remarkable devotion to the Emperor, have ascended to something similar to that of a demon prince. They have been imbued with a portion of the Emperor's strength and abilities, which grants them remarkable powers, swinging flaming swords and manifesting gouts of holy flame from their person or weaponry. They take to the battlefield aloft on glorious feathered wings, like an avenging angel, sent to deliver salvation to the faithful and damnation to the wicked. And I don't think it's possible to truly put into words what such an entity does for the morale of the Emperor's faithful. They appear when all hope seems lost, when the Imperium has suffered uncountable losses, and the enemy is sure to overwhelm them at any moment, when everything seems absolutely hopeless, and the mantra of the Emperor protects loses all meaning for the guardsmen in the trenches. In that moment, an actual angel appears, a literal physical manifestation of their faith, and a true, unquestionable miracle. To witness such divinity made manifest swells the hearts of the Sisters of Battle and the men and women of the Astra Militarum with hope, pride, and a refound vigor, a righteous second wind that propels them into combat, once more into the den of devils, shouting praise to the Emperor at the top of their lungs. So now that we know more about the Adepta Sororitas, let's talk about where they came from. You see, the Sisters of Battle can trace their origins back to a dark period in the Imperium's history known as the Age of Apostasy. And to truly understand the Sisters, we really need to have a grasp on what this often misunderstood time period was all about. And to really understand this, we're gonna need to know the difference between two powerful organizations within the Imperium, the Administratum and the Ministorum, which is often referred to as the Ecclesiarchy. You can think of them in a less than perfect analogy as the federal government and the state church of the Imperium. The Administratum was the system of bureaucrats placed in charge of running the Imperium as efficiently as possible. The pencil pushers and politicians, the ones responsible for collecting tithes from all the worlds within the Imperium, distribution of resources, overseeing supply lines, and anything you can think of when it comes to running a government. This system was a creation of the Emperor, and when he was mortally wounded and placed upon the Golden Throne, the full-time managing of the Imperium fell to them. Whereas the Ministorum is a massive and powerful organization that promotes that the Emperor is the one true God and manages the spiritual well-being, or more accurately, the strict compliance of every citizen to their imperial creed. And while he was alive, the Emperor had forbid the worship of any form of deity, and in particular of himself. Now, despite this edict, many cults would arise that worshipped him in secret across the Imperium. For the most part, they remained in the shadows, meeting in the boiler rooms of ships and holding candlelight sigils. With his death, the worship of him as a god spread like wildfire. By the 32nd millennia, it is estimated that nearly 3/4 of all of humanity had taken to worshipping him. The dominant cult that viewed him as a savior figure, known as the Temple of the Savior Emperor, would come to full power in the 32nd millennium, nearly 2,000 years after he'd been entombed. It was at this point that the High Lords of Terra recognized it as the state religion of the Imperium. The Church would gain a permanent representative amongst the High Lords, and its enormous amount of influence over mankind would continue to spread. With this, the Imperium of Man became a theocracy, where priests and spiritual leaders held just as much power, if not more, than the governing officials. By the end of the 33rd millennium, every single imperial world would have at least one massive shrine built in his honor, and the Ministorum would launch many holy wars designed to secure their position of power, stamping out any deviations from their beliefs, condemning all who would refuse to follow in the Emperor's light as heretics. And at this time, their only major threat to controlling the hearts and minds of the citizens of the Imperium came from a second cult of emperor worship known as the Confederation of Light. Whereas the Ecclesiarchy held the orthodox belief that sacrifices of wealth should be made to them in the form of tithes, taxes, and other such donations, in order to live a humble and blessed life, but also in that money could be used to spread goodwill to other imperial citizens and true believers across the galaxy. And there may have been some truth to this, but mostly it was a way of increasing the church's power. Now, the Confederation of Light also believed in spirituality through poverty, but didn't want that money going to their organization. In fact, they believed very sternly in the separation of church from the governing systems of the imperium. The Ecclesiarchy saw such views as massive threats to their power, and were basically like, welp, can't be having any of that nonsense. Heretics. They're all a bunch of heretics. And after a few failed attempts at infiltrating this imposter cult, the organization would launch its very first holy war. And since they had a lot more fanatical soldiers and much deeper coffers in order to fund their war effort, the Confederation of Light was all but completely wiped out, with only a few underground cults of followers still existing. Now in nearly full control of the minds and hearts of quintillions of faithful servants, the amount of wealth and power that was accumulating within the Ecclesiarchy is simply incomprehensible. They funneled this money into building ever-increasingly grand and ornate cathedrals on worlds across the Imperium, to the point where many of these worlds would become what were known as shrine worlds, and became places where billions of pilgrims would migrate every year, turning them into economic hotspots. More importantly, their wealth was also funded into enormous armies that would go on to fight in many more holy wars in the future. At this point, the Administratum and other governing organizations within the Imperium were rightfully getting a little pissed off. The church had such an enormous amount of control that it was able to supersede any of the orders or edicts put in place by the Administratum. They were seen by the majority of the population as speaking with the authority of the Emperor himself, which certainly superseded any laws created by bureaucrats. All of the tithes and taxes that were being collected went to the church first, leaving the coffers of the Administratum in a constant decline, leaving next to nothing to actually accomplish anything. The Ecclesiarchy began setting up its own laws, placing its own representatives as governors over different sectors, and started raising tons of new armies. They nearly had full control over the Imperium at this point. And in order to gain back some of the power and influence that the Administratum had lost, they made the decision to basically infiltrate the Ecclesiarchy. They made sure that the members the church would elect to hold powerful positions were either secretly loyal to the Administratum, or at least had their loyalty bought and paid for. This would lead to a series of completely incompetent leaders that probably ended up doing an enormous amount of damage to the people that lived under their rule. But the Administratum saw this as necessary for the continued existence of the Imperium as a whole. The Ministorum, frustrated by the financial impact these campaigns by the Administratum had taken on them, declared that they would move their seat of power from Holy Terra to a planet known as Ophelia 7, one of the richest planets in the segmentum, only really being eclipsed by Terra itself and Mars. Completely moving their base of operations 10,000 light years out into the galaxy was a massive undertaking that cost an inconceivable amount of tax dollars. But the church saw it as worthwhile, because after the move, they were finally rid of the Administratum's bureaucracy and intervention tactics, and they quickly regained all of the lost funds and power, and then, yet again, raised even more powerful armies and fleets, becoming potentially the strongest military force in the entire Imperium. Their militant branches were collectively referred to as the Frateris Templar. And in the 36th millennium, the battle for control over the Imperium between the Ecclesiarchy and the Administratum reached a boiling point, and the Imperium would enter a new age, the Age of Apostasy. The Ecclesiarchy ruled like this for hundreds of years, until a new Ecclesiarch, Gregor XI, was elected. He was a deeply spiritual man that saw the move to Ophelia as misguided. He felt that all of the faithful should work together for the betterment of the Imperium, and thus declared that the Ecclesiarchy would be moving back to Terra. Now, the Cardinals of the Ministorum did not like this one bit, considering just how much had been spent getting them out there in the first place. And judging on their coffers, it had been incredibly successful. But the new Ecclesiarch could not be swayed, and thus the move was initiated, and the head officials of the Ecclesiarchy returned to Terra once again, stretching their coffers to the absolute limit. Not surprisingly, his rule did not last much longer than this, as he was found dead shortly later, having been apparently assassinated through food poisoning. This is where one of the most hated, feared, and all-around notorious characters in all of 40k enters the story, the madman known as Goge Vandire. Vandire was the 361st head of the Administratum, a position he managed to gain through a campaign of blackmail, bribery, espionage, and assassination. He had a deep hatred for the Ministorum and set in motion a plan to gain control of it. He did this by taking possibly the weakest man to have ever lived, Paulus III, and selected him to become the new Ecclesiarch. Any that would stand in the way of him getting the position would mysteriously disappear or meet an unfortunate end. After Paulus successfully became the new Ecclesiarch, rumors immediately began to spread in the higher echelons of the imperium of his apparent degeneracy and horrid personal pastimes. Vandire led a force of armed soldiers to infiltrate the shrine palace and gun down any that stood in their way. The official report that he gives was that when him and his men kicked in the door, Paulus was engaged in some form of horrific blasphemous act and had to be put down. After which, Vandire declared himself as the new Ecclesiarch, which effectively gained him control of both the Administratum and the Ministorum, which at this point in time made him the most powerful man the Imperium had ever seen next to the Emperor himself. He then set about on a crusade against the Ecclesiarchy, purging any groups that would deny his claim as Ecclesiarch. Now, even before this happened, Vandire was known for being unstable, despite the fact that he was definitely shrewd and cunning. But from this point forward, his insanity would begin to increase exponentially. He was known to frequently go into bouts of madness, where he would frantically spout gibberish and have full-blown arguments with himself. If anyone overheard this and asked questions, he would claim that the Emperor was speaking directly to him. Or, if he couldn't be bothered, he would just have them assassinated. He would appoint either other equally insane individuals that believed in him, or weak-willed people that he could control, into positions of power to further spread his dominance over the Imperium. And I know this is a Sisters of Battle video, and I just spent a whole bunch of time talking about specifically not the Sisters of Battle, so thankfully, to get back on topic, this is where they enter the picture. You see, it was around this time that one of Vandire's scribes informed him of a religious sect of warrior women known as the Daughters of the Emperor, in a little-known backwater agri world known as San Lior. These women were said to have remarkable military prowess, and were fully 100% dedicated to the worship of the Emperor. Vandire and his armies went to San Lior to see the women for himself. When they arrived, him and the great retinue of soldiers and war machines marched onto the small town the women called home. At the gates, he demanded to be let inside, but the daughters proclaimed to him that they answered only to the Emperor himself, and would open the gates for no man. Now, just about everyone who knew Vandire was 100% ready for him to explode into one of his crazed fits of rage. But seemingly out of character, he smiled and was incredibly calm. He said, "If I can prove to you that the Emperor speaks through me, will you hear me out?" The gate master relayed this information to the daughters, and they agreed to let him and a small contingency of his men inside. He was met by Alicia Dominica, the leader of the daughters, and the women that she led. He pulled out his rosary holding it in his hand. He told one of them to shoot him in the chest. He said, "The Emperor will not allow me to be harmed." His request was granted, and a las pistol shot was fired at him. There was a great blinding white light that consumed Vandire's entire physical form. And when the light dissipated, Vandire stood there unharmed. The daughters dropped to their knees and sweared loyalty to him, seeing him as a messiah figure of the god they worshipped. Now, none of this is true. Vandire was a madman, but he could be incredibly convincing when he wanted to be. The Rosarius was a personal refractor field, a force field-like device. No one on this backwater world had ever seen such a thing, so he used this to deceive them. And surprising absolutely no one, the degenerate renamed them from the Daughters of the Emperor to the Brides of the Emperor, and used them as his personal retinue and bodyguard from that point forward. The bride's martial prowess was beyond exceptional, having no fear due to their unshakable faith, and when combined with the ornate and high-tech weaponry funded by the Ecclesiarchy and the Administratum's coffers, they were an incredibly deadly fighting force to behold, and would end up defending him against several different assassination attempts. What followed next was a dark period within the Imperium's history, marked by war and famine, where Vandire unleashed his armies against anyone and everyone for even the slightest of offenses, and many referred to his rule as the Reign of Blood. The Imperium seemed doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past, and once again was in peril of collapsing. This was a period where every faction within the Imperium ended up getting sucked in by Vandire's madness, and at one point, a combined force of Adeptus Mechanicus, as well as 4 chapters of the Space Marines belonging to the Imperial Fists, the Firehawks, the Soul Drinkers, and the Black Templar began to attack the Ecclesiarchal Palace. Their goal, to rid the Imperium of Vandire's tyranny. But this is a video about the sisters, so we're gonna skip ahead to where they come in. As in a twist of fate, it would be the Brides of the Emperor who would end up putting down the tyrant themselves. You see, the only Imperial faction who really hadn't gotten involved at this point were the Custodians. they didn't really consider themselves part of the Imperium. They were soldiers and guardians of the Emperor and the Emperor alone, choosing not to involve themselves in the machinations of the Imperium unless they deemed it the God Emperor's will to do so. But as the true scope of Vandire's reign of blood became apparent to them, they couldn't stand by idly anymore. A group of the custodians made their way inside Vandire's palace, where they were eventually intercepted by the brides of the Emperor. Some accounts state that the brides dueled with the custodians, while others state only Mina, champion of Dominica, fought the lead custodian, Longinus, to a standstill. Other accounts state that only mere threats were leveled at one another. Whatever the case may be, Longinus sought to prevent any further bloodshed than necessary, and asked the sisters for a parley. In doing this, he ordered the other custodians to stand down and lay down their weapons. He spoke with the women, attempting to appeal to their faith, that Vandire was nothing but a bloodthirsty tyrant, and the Emperor would have never ordained something as vile as his reign. The brides were not swayed by this. Their faith was unbreakable and were prepared to fight them to the death. As seeing no other option, the custodian made one more attempt to convince them, leaving the men under his control as hostages. He took Alicia and her 5 personal bodyguards through a series of secret underground passages that led to the Imperial Palace. The women that accompanied her were named Catherine, Lucia, Mina, Silvana, and Arabella. And remember their names, because they're going to be important later. His goal was to bring them before the Emperor himself. And I can't accurately put into words what a big deal that is. No one had been permitted audience with the Emperor's body in thousands of years. The custodians were offering these women the opportunity to literally stand before and commune with their god. Now, what exactly happened that fateful day inside the walls of the Sanctorum Imperialis is known only to those 6 women and the God Emperor himself. But when they emerged, it was said that their eyes burned with anger and wrath. Dominica proclaimed Vandire as a monster, a heretic, a twisted blasphemer that had corrupted not only the Ecclesiarchy, but the sacred order of the daughters themselves. They had been used and shamed by the epitome of filth and swore vengeance upon him. They cast off the moniker of brides and once again became the daughters of the Emperor. Longinus led them back to the shrine, and the women broke into Vandire's office. Alicia unsheathed her power sword and issued an impassioned decree of heresy at him. You have committed the ultimate heresy. Not only have you turned your back on the Emperor and stepped from his light, you have profaned his name and almost destroyed everything he has driven to build. You have perverted and twisted the path he has laid for mankind to tread. As your own decrees have stated, there can be no mercy for such a crime, no pity for such a criminal. I renounce your lordship. You walk in the darkness and cannot be allowed to live. Your sentence has been long overdue, and now it is time for you to die. And don't get me wrong, Vandire is an absolute monster, a reprehensible character. But his final words here were actually kind of amazing. Absolutely out of his mind and completely divorced from reality, he stared her down and proclaimed, "I don't have time to die. I'm far too busy." Alicia swung her sword, beheading the tyrant and thus ending the reign of blood. With the end of Vandire's reign, the Imperium began to piece itself back together. A man named Sebastian Thor would end up becoming the new Ecclesiarch, and he had actually met with the surviving members of the Confederation of Light, the target of the Ecclesiarch's first holy war. Their humble vision of emperor worship would end up replacing that of the Temple of the Holy Savior's theology. Thor would go on to severely limit the church's power, and once again, separated it from the Administratum. The Ministorum from that point forward would still be a powerful organization within the Imperium, but it wouldn't be completely dominating. He would also go on to limit the church's military power by disbanding the Frateris Templar and issuing a decree that said that the church would have no men under arms from this point forward. A cleverly disguised loophole, as he replaced the previous military powers of the Ecclesiarchy with the daughters of the Emperor, who from that point forward would be known as the Adepta Sororitas, and whose militant order would be collectively referred to as the Sisters of Battle. And just a quick footnote here, the no men under arms thing is kind of old lore at this point, and in more recent interpretations of this time, Thor seems to still hold that limiting the church's military might is incredibly important, but instead of them existing through a loophole, he sees the sisters as a necessity and that their skills must be utilized for the good of humanity. Events like this in 40k normally have a whole bunch of different interpretations, so whichever one you choose to believe in this particular instance is totally up to you. After this, the Sisters of Battle, led by Dominica and her 5 bodyguards, would take part in many new wars of faith. spreading the Emperor's light to the dark corners of the galaxy, and swearing oaths to destroy the heretic, the witch, and the mutant wherever it may appear. They were provided incredibly powerful weaponry, and would end up becoming some of the staunchest defenders of mankind that had ever existed. After a point, Dominica oversaw a reformation of her sisterhood, as she wanted to prevent another Ecclesiarch who would arise in the future from having full control over the Adepta Sororitas. The forces were split between Terra and the Ecclesiarchy's former seat of power, Ophelia 7, and this would end up creating two separate covenants. Covenant Prioris, that was based on Terra, and Covenant Sanctorum, based on Ophelia 7. Each of the covenants was absolutely massive, housing tens of thousands of sisters, with more and more recruits joining over time. After Sebastian Thor ended up passing away, at the ripe old age of 112, his successors would follow in his wake, and over time declare that the two covenants be split into smaller militant orders, as each of them continued to grow larger and larger. It was Dominica herself who first established the sisterhood, and when the first splitting was ordained, in the year 378 of the 36th millennia, she would become the canoness of the first order militant of Covenant Prioris, the Order of the Ebon Chalice. The same year, Catherine would become the founder of the Order of the Fiery Heart, which would eventually be renamed to the Order of our Martyred Lady with her death. Lucia would go on to found the Order of the Valorous Heart, while Silvana founded the Order of the Argent Shroud. Almost 2,000 years later, after Dominica and all 5 of her bodyguards had long since passed away, and had officially been declared as saints by the Ecclesiarchy, in the 38th millennia, the two covenants would split one more time. Covenant Sanctorum would create the Order of the Bloody Rose, founded in honor of their patron saint Mina, and Covenant Prioris would create the Order of the Sacred Rose, named in honor of their patron saint Arabella. By the time of the 41st millennium, all of these orders have existed for thousands of years, and all of which have incredibly unique histories, cultures, and ways of conducting war. So let's talk about each one of them. The Order of the Martyred Lady is by far the most numerous and widespread of all of the orders militant of the Adepta Sororitas. They have sworn an oath of vengeance to hunt down the heretic wherever it rears its head, from the galaxy's core to the galactic rim. Although all sisters have been taught that a death fighting in the Emperor's name is a glorious thing, the Sisters of our Martyred Lady take this much further. So much so that their fearlessness in battle can often be mistaken as a death wish, as the order has developed what seems to be a cult of martyrdom. Such a sister will stand defiantly against the enemies of the Emperor, with bolter in hand and revving chainswords, shouting hymns to the God Emperor as they slay heretics, Xenos, and mutant alike. When she dies, her death will be met with cheers from her surviving sisters, as to witness such a glorious and heroic death is a gift that should be celebrated. The surviving sisters will fight harder and faster, as the Emperor's gaze will be drawn to the battlefield, and miracles that can only be explained as such will begin to manifest for the warriors she left behind, swiftly turning the tide of battle in the sisters' favor. To the ignorant observer, the way the Sisters of the Martyred Lady fight may seem unorganized and a bit chaotic. It is said they spread across the battlefield like wildfire, units spreading in every direction, with bolter and flamer in hand. Their fighting style, however chaotic it may seem, leads them to be incredibly quick and efficient, and they are able to switch tactics in but a moment, keeping the enemy confused and not knowing exactly how to react. The reality is that these women are incredibly disciplined, and they follow the teachings of St. Catherine to a letter, a woman who was a devout student of not just the imperial faith, but of military doctrines as well. Whereas the Order of the Martyred Lady practices the Emperor's vengeance, the Order of the Valorous Heart is one that's much more representative of his stoicism and forbearance. Their founder and matriarch Lucia was said to be the opposite of St. Catherine. Whereas Catherine was characterized by her burning passion, Lucia was stoic, level-headed, and calculating. Her and the sisters that would follow in her path would be an immovable, unbreakable anvil to complement the fiery, crushing hammer of St. Catherine's order. Through Lucia's teachings, her sisters would forever have to carry a great burden, and would never be allowed to forget the sins of their ancestors, the brides of the Emperor. Because of their mistakes, they would have to live a life of penance, which took the form of aggressively seeking out worlds rife with corruption and marked by a lack of faith, planets that had been entirely consumed by witchcraft and chaotic cults. And through the fires of war would they systematically grind them down. In battle, the Order of the Valorous Heart employs a number of tactics designed to cripple their enemies' supply lines and infrastructure, choosing to target the means of production, and systematically destroying fuel reserves, poison water supplies, and burst any pipelines containing radioactive or hazardous material. In addition, They would seek to destroy any food supplies, including plants and animals that their enemies could gain sustenance from, transforming the environment into a barren and hostile wasteland, locking the enemy in place, and pushing their offensive lines. They would do this to grind them down in a war of attrition, a style of battle that the Valorous heart is incredibly skilled in. And the way St. Lucia would end up gaining martyrdom was by meeting a terrible fate, as she was captured by heretics and tortured for a long period of time, having her eyes gouged out and being forced to listen to the suffering of everyone else the cult had captured. She stoically endured countless agonies until eventually succumbing to her injuries. The cult would then begin to spread the rumor that in her final moments, she had renounced her faith and rejected the God Emperor. Their triumphant mockery was short-lived, as her fellow sisters then spent the next several decades hunting down every last one of them. What the sisters ended up doing with the captured cultists is unknown. However, it is said that ever since that day, deep within the undercrofts of their sanctuary, the sisters have been putting their knowledge of life extension and pain enhancement to great use. The women of the Valorous heart wear their battle scars with pride, as through pain and suffering, they feel a closeness to their matriarch, enduring just a sliver of what she must have had to go through. It is said that they never use anything to reduce the pain of their injuries, because to do so would be seen as hypocritical, as Lucia had taught them that through their faith in the Emperor, they could overcome any amount of suffering. The Order of the Bloody Rose, founded in the name of Saint Mina, represents the embodiment of the Emperor's hatred and anger towards heretics. They do not exist to save the innocents of the Imperium, nor do they care for the ramification of their bloody and violent crusades. They exist only to slaughter the guilty. Since the beginning, the Order of the Bloody Rose has been seen as a sisterhood of executioners. Now, normally when the sisters of other orders are deployed to a world in order to purge it of heretics, in their wake would be members from the Order Hospitaller and Dialogus, the former bringing aid to the wounded civilians of the world, and the latter to catalog and record the events of the battle, and thus the subsequent liberation of the planet. When they would follow the Sisters of the Bloody Rose, they would find nothing but death and destruction. So clinical was their righteous butchery that the sisters wouldn't even stop for but a moment to set free their enemies' captives. Their only mission, to cleanse the world through blood and fire. Using the blood of her fallen sisters, the Canoness Superior known as Saint Mari would end up penning an article known as the Thorn Treatise. In this document, she declared that the path of the least evil lies always in the swift obliteration of those who oppose the faith. Mercy in any form must come after the venting of righteous anger. The sisters of this order are taught to harness all of their violent tendencies in anger. Every feeling of hatred or impulse to enact violence is seen as a valuable tool to be unleashed upon the enemies of their faith. Whereas other orders participate in silent contemplation and prayer, the sanctuaries of the Bloody Rose are instead filled with the righteous bellowing of litanies at the top of their lungs, each verse dripping with rage. The order has an affinity for close combat, often utilizing tactics and maneuvers to bait their enemies into overextending, before spinning about and slamming into them, crashing into the enemy lines and crushing them under their boots. To the outside observer, this may look like a bunch of blood-crazed barbarians drunk on slaughter, but the reality is that they are incredibly disciplined, and that hatred and anger is something that they have learned to hone and unleash only at the moment before a strike. Through this, they can throw bare-fisted blows that shatter skulls and explode organs. The Order of the Bloody Rose believes that only by spilling the blood of the unfaithful shall a world be purified once again. The Order of the Ebon Chalice was the first order of the Sisters of Battle, and was founded by none other than their matriarch, Alicia Dominica, the woman who executed Vandire and ended his reign of blood. Whereas other orders reject their ancestors or see the mistakes as something that requires a lifetime of penance, the Order of the Ebon Chalice seeks to adhere strictly to their teachings, only deviating from them to incorporate more modern weaponry and armor, and has a great deal of respect and veneration for the original teachings of the Daughters of the Emperor, from before Vandire corrupted their order. Dominica was so deeply respected that all of the Sisters of the Ebon Chalice wished to do all they could to emulate her greatness. As the executioner of Vandire, she was seen as the God Emperor's champion. Now, where they get their name from is actually pretty interesting. You see, there was this ancient artifact known as the Grail of Ages that Dominica herself would carry into battle. It was a black goblet that was said to represent her communion with the Emperor. There are very few records that exist that tell exactly what this relic was capable of, many of which making seemingly impossible claims. One account says that during one battle in particular, the energy of the Grail was unleashed, and every single psyker on the entire planet, not just on the battlefield, the entire planet, immediately burst into flames. There's another account of a different battle that states that Dominica poured out the contents of the goblet, and when she did this, the Emperor was able to speak through her. He uttered but a single word, but there was so much psychic power behind its syllables that an entire army was instantly destroyed. The Sisters of the Ebon Chalice do not speak of the Grail, and if pressed, they say that it is simply a representation of all of the secrets great and terrible that Dominica learned on that fateful day when the Emperor spoke to her, and that they and they alone must now be the bearers of that sacred knowledge. And in order to protect the secrets of the Grail, the Sisters of the Ebon Chalice will pursue any recorded record of an account of the Grail's existence or its secrets, purging and destroying these records whenever they are found, condemning any of the scribes that penned the work and thus have knowledge of the Grail's secrets as heretics. Much like the Order of the Ebon Chalice, the Order of the Argent Shroud derives its name from an ancient relic. You see, their founder and matriarch, Saint Silvana, ended up getting murdered before she could unleash her first ever war of faith. Now, this is an event that is shrouded in mystery, and even to this day, it remains kind of unclear what exactly happened to her, but most accounts make mention of some kind of assassin. Now, the most credible stories say that the assassination attempt was not meant for her, but for Dominica herself, and Silvana, the ever-loyal bodyguard, threw herself in between Dominica and the killer, sacrificing herself so that the Emperor's chosen could live on. And super mysteriously, 7 days after her body was laid to rest, she suddenly vanished, the only thing left being a ghostly imprint of her skeleton on her death shroud. Nowadays, this shroud is considered a holy relic to the Sisters, and it's where the order gets their name. The Sisters of this order believe that actions speak louder than words, and through great deeds are spirits purified. Their founder was said to be remarkably brave, constantly throwing herself into danger in order to protect those around her. Now, interestingly enough, not a single account of her ever speaking exists. There are no transcriptions or even written documents from her, and the order emulates this by going through long periods of silence, speaking only to pray or sing hymns. Now, their prayers differ from that of their sisters in other orders, where they don't really ask for the Emperor's blessing or protection, choosing instead to use these moments to proclaim their imminent deeds that they will perform in his name. Even outside of these periods of silence, the women of this order seldom ever speak, even to convey tactics amongst their allies, something that makes fighting by their side incredibly difficult for many armies outside of the order. They choose to instead trust in the divine guidance of the Emperor, rather than formulating complex plans and stratagems. And it may seem counterintuitive, but it actually kind of tends to be quite effective, as the Sisters throw themselves into battle against much larger armies, and are able to smash through defensive formations, and weather the barrage of gunfire and artillery batteries, almost as if the guidance of the Emperor is allowing them to act on an instinctive level to support one another. The Argent Shroud is famously known for speedy assaults, and specialize in hit-and-run style tactics. Their strike comes as fast as lightning, followed by a rapid withdrawal, leaving their enemy shaken and unable to reorganize before the Sisters regroup and hit them again. They have a reputation as some of the deadliest shock troops within the entire Adepta Sororitas, and much like their beloved matriarch, their faith ends up shining even brighter when surrounded by enemies, as every single one of them would throw themselves in harm's way in order to protect her fellow sisters, just like their patron saint Mina would have done. Whereas the other orders that we have spoken about seem pretty brutal in how they wage war and interpret the will of the Emperor, the Order of the Sacred Rose stands aside from the rest of them and represents the Emperor's hope for mankind. They sing songs of hope and salvation rather than that of holy wrath. The women of the Sacred Rose believe that only through faith is victory achieved. If somebody's faith is strong enough, they can do the impossible. They can bend the laws of the universe and command the stars themselves to destroy the enemies of mankind. They believe that every battle they have ever or will ever participate in has been preordained according to the Emperor's great plan, that their victory was completely and utterly inevitable. Now, even in the event of their death, the Sisters of this order believe that a single martyr can ignite the fires of faith in thousands of souls, their hearts and minds coming together in a force more powerful than any weapon that has ever existed. Arabella, their matriarch, was an incredibly calm and serene woman, with a demeanor that would never falter even in the face of the untold horrors of the galaxy. It is said that if it had not been for her, the original meeting between Dominica and the custodians may have ended in bloodshed. It was her serene tranquility and the ability to touch the hearts of all of those around her that set in motion the events that would see mankind freed from the reign of blood. It was Arabella's mission to break the shackles of fear and doubt that bound the faithful and set free humanity from the corrupting nature of the heretic. Now, when she lived amongst the stars, it was only the foolish and ignorant that would mistake her serenity for weakness, as there are a lot of accounts of heretics literally exploding the moment her eyes fell upon them. To the heretic, beholding her radiant glory in its true form was so incredible that it caused their eyes to melt from their skulls. Of all of the saints, it's possibly Arabella that ended up performing the most miracles during her lifetime. The sisters of her order set forth, bringing salvation to the previously held worlds of the faithful that had long since been thought lost to the darkness. The Sacred Rose would crusade to these worlds and butcher the cabals and cults that kept its citizens in chains. When the sisters of this order marched to war, they do so to the combined song of thousands of their voices, singing beautiful hymns to the Emperor, hymns that raise the spirits of the true believers and induce an overwhelming feeling of dread and despair in the heretic. Recorded instances of miracles occurring are a really big deal, and out of all the orders, the Sisters of the Sacred Rose tend to see them manifested most often. Since this happens so regularly within the order, many members of the Ecclesiarchy will often follow them into battle, eager to witness the hand of the Emperor working through his daughters firsthand. Now, on one hand, this may seem a little bit frustrating to have a whole bunch of taggers-on, untrained priests and scholars following true warriors into battle. But Arabella taught her sisters that the Emperor often acts through the least of his servants. So great was she that the unwashed masses came to her in droves, and through her faith, she would turn these groups into true armies of indomitable warriors, even though most of them had never held a weapon before. Because of her radiance, these men and women were ready to stand and fight for their world. The Order of the Sacred Rose stands as a beacon of hope in a galaxy that always seems on the brink of collapsing. They stand ready to protect the faithful, and somehow seem able to appear whenever and wherever they are needed, even if a distress signal was never issued. Now, many would question how such a thing is even possible, but the faithful know the truth. And as I mentioned earlier, the Sororitas is not just a military organization. They have many non-combat orders as well, such as the Order's Hospitaller, Famulus, and Dialogus. The Order Hospitaller provides nurses, surgeons, and doctors to every branch of the Imperium's military, taking to the most grueling of battlefields in order to cauterize wounds and saw off gangrenous limbs. They show the Emperor's mercy and compassion to the faithful, taking care to heal the wounds of those that would fight in the Emperor's name. They are some of the best medical specialists in the Imperium, and aside from their role in the battlefield, also house and catalog truly enormous libraries of medical knowledge, not just on human anatomy, but additionally on the anatomy of every known Xenos species, as well as the inner workings of all of the weapons that they utilize against the forces of mankind, in order to better understand how to heal the wounds inflicted by such terrible instruments of war. Their extensive knowledge on the anatomy of Xenos is incredibly important when it comes to developing new ways to fight them. And on a slightly darker note, confessors and inquisitors from the Ecclesiarchy will often utilize their medical expertise in their interrogations, healing any injuries the interrogator may inflict on an individual expected of heresy. They'll literally surgically reattach limbs and heal mortal wounds just for the interrogator to sever or rupture them again. The combination of both of these individuals' particular skill sets being more than enough to draw out a confession from even the most stoic and resilient of heretics. Now, the sisters that serve within the Order Dialogus are trained scholars, advisors, and translators of every text imaginable, whether that be of the various human languages that have been found throughout the galaxy in the present and in ancient texts, but also in the heretical writings of aliens and chaos worshippers. Their life is dedicated to collecting as many pieces of ancient scripture as they can, as there is always a chance that some ancient alien species cataloged even the briefest of encounters with the Emperor. And the acquisition of such a text, even if it offers only the slightest glimpse into His Majesty, is a holy quest of great importance. All of the texts that the Dialogus encounter are translated into High Gothic. They're incredibly skilled and have built a massive library of knowledge on every enemy the sisters have ever encountered. They are incredibly adept at finding threats in seemingly innocuous and benign symbolism and messages, as the heretic is incredibly clever and doesn't necessarily just spell out their evil plans on paper for all to see. The Sisters of Order Famulus are skilled diplomats and advisors. Their silver tongue and incredible ability to network allows them to connect with the noble families of the Imperium and keep them united in a common cause of doing the most good for the Imperium whenever possible. They play a critical role in brokering deals and agreements between a vast array of powerful households and factions, overseeing the negotiations around supply lines, mining operations, formation of fighting forces, arranged marriages between powerful families, and just about anything else you can think of. They are women that pull on the strings of the Imperium's aristocracy and ensure that each and every noble household has everything that they will need if they are called upon to fight and die in the Emperor's name. Because these women have immediate access to so many powerful people. They also serve the role of being spies and informants for the Ecclesiarchy, keeping a watchful eye on all the pieces on the board. It is they who know if a player in the great game makes an illegal move, or tries to do anything that would go against the Ecclesiarchy's goals, whether that take the form of espionage, squandering of resources, or even full-blown heresy. Without the women of Famulus, treachery may be allowed to fester and grow until it is too late to be stopped. And although not normally given a lot of attention, there are dozens if not hundreds of smaller orders within the Sororitas as well. They don't often get focused on as their roles don't tend to have a major impact on the macro setting. One such order is known as Order Fenestris, whose entire order is dedicated to the humble task in maintaining the illuminated armor glass panes of most of the holy shrines and cathedrals found within the Imperium, which may not seem like much, but it's definitely a holy task and a noble profession. And I'm sure the God Emperor appreciates all of their fine work. Whether or not the Emperor has truly become a god, or even if he was all along, despite his claims to the contrary, is a much debated fact within the Warhammer 40k community. Regardless of the truth, it is irrelevant, for the entirety of the Adepta Sororitas believes it to be so. They are his holy warriors, his righteous will made manifest. They relentlessly crusade across the galaxy, suffering not the unclean to live. They will stand as defenders of mankind, a physical incarnation of his holy light. No matter how dark things get, no matter how hopeless it seems, hope remains alive in the faithful, because they know they can rely upon the sisters to deliver them salvation. Their wars of faith will continue for thousands of years to come, their righteous work never ending, so long as the heretic, the witch, the alien, and the mutant continue to draw breath and threaten the Emperor's kingdom through the sin of existence. One by one, they will be hunted down and destroyed, purged in his name. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, then consider dropping a like on it and subscribing to the channel. If you're watching this video within the first week of it being posted, stay tuned because we're doing a little bit of a giveaway. And if you're watching it way out in the grimdark future, and by that I mean after August 27th, 2022, then don't worry about everything that comes after this. And now let's talk about how you can win some of those prizes that I mentioned earlier in the sponsored segment. The people over at Warhammer 40k Tacticus were nice enough to provide all of these for my viewers. And they're the ones that are handling this contest. They just told me that I can pick the winners however I want. So this is how we're gonna do it. If you haven't already joined my Discord, there's gonna be a link for that down in the description of this video. Join the Discord and then navigate down to the channel called Tacticus Giveaway. Once you're there, all you have to do is post a comment. Tell me what your favorite thing about Warhammer is. It could be a favorite faction, character, favorite thing about the tabletop game, or a cool memory that you have about Warhammer. It really doesn't matter what you post, I just kinda like reading your comments. 1 week from today, on August 27th, I'll be using a random number generator to randomly pick 4 different winners. After I've figured out who the winners are, I'll make a short announcing them on my YouTube channel, and also post them in that same channel on the Discord. I'll direct message you over on Discord, and then pass your information along to the Tacticus team, and then they'll ship you out your prize. All of the rules for entry can be found in that Discord channel. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I would just do it through my YouTube comment section, but we've had a lot of fake accounts trying to pretend to be me recently, and you know, it just will work a lot easier if we do it through the Discord. Good luck to everybody that enters the contest. And again, thank y'all so much for all the support that you've given me. This whole YouTube journey has been absolutely wild, and I really, honest to God, can't thank you enough. And okay, I guess that covers everything. I'll catch y'all in the next one.